Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this evening's research webinar. And once again, I'm live from my kitchen. I've even managed to eat my tea, so we're already off to a good start. However, my son's tea is in the oven, and I think the timer is literally about to go off, so we'll see how it all goes. But when your working day begins at 6 o'clock, eating late isn't too good. So anyway, thank you for joining us for this evening's webinar. If you've joined us for the earlier ones, I hope you enjoyed the first three, which were presented by Gary Cook, Maggie Cooper and Jane Sozabowski. All the webinars are recorded for future reference, and access to recordings is a BNMS member benefit. So if you're a member, you still have the opportunity to watch them now through our members page. Tonight's webinar, like the rest of the series, is open and watch them live for free. But as always, if you do find it useful, please have a think about joining our society if you're not already a member. And if you know of anyone who would benefit from accessing these live webinars, please spread the word. There are still a couple of them left. Anyway, on to this evening's webinar. Today's main presentation is entitled Experience of Leading a Multi-Centre Trial and will be presented to you by Dr. Ian Newington. Now, I don't know Ian personally, so don't have anything really juicy to tell you about him, but having read his CV, I'm sure tonight's webinar is going to be both informative and interesting. Ian is a synthetic chemist by background, and after 2 years working in Big Pharma, took his DPhil before working in the R&D labs in Amersham and Kodak. One fact about Ian that really jumped out at me is that he's a co-inventor on 38 patent applications, so he's actually a real-life inventor now. That's pretty exciting. Another thing I learned about Ian is that he's actively involved in the NIHR in a number of different capacities, including a project looking to leverage the breadth of NIHR for the benefit of other stakeholders. This can only be a good thing for organisations like BNMS. Do you know, I told you, I am going to have to switch that off and I will be back. Right. Sorry, everybody, about that. So he's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry and a member of the UK Research and Innovation Peer Review College. That's the external advisory board for the NHS Cancer Innovation Programme. He is a mentor for the UKRI, which is the UK Research and Innovation Peer Review, Future Leaders Fellowships, and the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Programme, and the KQ Labs Accelerator Programme, which is a sort of tailored programme that helps startups transform healthcare through data-driven solutions in a very short period of about 5 months. So more than a few strings to his bow, and I'm very grateful to Ian for bringing his considerable experience to bear in delivering our webinar this evening. As usual, Ian's presentation will last around 30 to 40 minutes. And for those of you who are able to join us live, there will be the opportunity for you to ask questions at the end in our Q&A session, where he'll be joined by our panel of experts. The panel members joining Ian this evening will be Professor Mark Gaze and Dr. Stephen Vu. And once again, I'll be chairing the Q&A session. So a little bit about our panel. Mark is a consultant in clinical oncology at UCLH and Great Ormond Street Hospital. His practice these days is exclusively with children and young people, for who he has the whole array of radiation treatments at his disposal, including complex photon techniques, proton beam therapy, and brachytherapy, as well as, of course, molecular radiotherapy. He has a particular interest in MRT for neuroblastoma, pediatric neuroendocrine tumours, and thyroid cancer in children and teenagers, and is involved in national and international clinical trials of molecular radiotherapy in children, as well as linking in with preclinical scientists developing novel theranostics. Mark is president of the Pediatric Radiation Oncology Society and past chairman of the Children's Cancer and Leukemia Group. He's also a key member of the BMS MRT Consortium, which is how I know him, as Mark provides vital support to the consortium on the subject of paediatric therapy. Do you know, I just think it's really easy to be a bit blasé when you read enough a CV like Mark's. But when I really think about all he does for children, I really feel very humbled and genuinely grateful to him as the mother of 2 boys. Dr. Stephen Vu is a consultant at the Institute of Nuclear Medicine, UCLH, and advisor on evidence-based medicine for NICE. Stefan read immunology and medicine at the ULM University Medical Center in Germany, and demonstrated molecular imaging at the Cardiovascular Research Institute of Maastricht in the Netherlands. He must have caught the nuclear medicine bug, as they then went on to train in nuclear medicine and molecular radionuclide therapies at Maastricht University Medical Center. He was previously EANM Fellow in Molecular Imaging at the University Medical Center in Zurich, and his clinical interests are in MRT, theranostics, and imaging inflammatory and oncology disorders. So another panel of pretty impressive experts in the field at your disposal once again on a Tuesday evening. And I'd like to thank Ian and all our panel members for giving up their valuable time this evening to share their expertise with us all. As with last time, to keep things simple, we are using a Q&As tab. So if you wish to ask a question, please use this tab to enter it. And I would encourage you to try and think of questions, because it's nice to have a sort of bit of more of a lively discussion at the end. And no question is too daft, because I'll probably be the one asking the daft questions. Please don't use the chat function for questions, because I might miss them, but you can use the chat function for general comments, information, or feedback. At the end of the presentation, I will read out the questions logged in the Q&A section to the panel on your behalf for discussion. I'd like to take this opportunity before we start to thank our sponsors, SkyTech, Curium and Siemens, who've helped make this evening possible. I'm really looking forward to hearing what Ian has to share with us. I hope you find this webinar both interesting and useful. I look forward to hearing your feedback. So there we have it. Without further ado, I'll pass you over to Dr. Ian Newington. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilly. So I'm not an expert in running clinical trials, but what I'm going to talk to you about is some of the NIHR funding and support opportunities that relate to, and how you can find out about them, how you can engage with, and hopefully be telling you some things that you may not know. And I think I'm going to be relying on the others in the panel who have got some more experience of actually running clinical trials in this space. So I am an assistant director in the innovations team at the NIHR Coordinating Centre, and have been associated with that group for the last 10 years or so, mainly in the innovations team, looking at sort of medical devices and diagnostic technology. So I'm probably going to talk more from the imaging and sort of diagnostic side rather than the therapeutic side in this particular case. But as Jenny pointed out, I did spend about nearly 9 years at GE Healthcare in Amersham, working on developing new PET and SPECT agents for imaging purposes. So I know a little bit about nuclear medicine, which hopefully will be helpful. So NIHR, I don't know what you know about the NIHR. Let me see if I can move this. Yeah, that's better. The NIHR is quite a big beast. It's an entire system of for carrying out research in healthcare. It's what we try to do is fund high quality, timely research, invest in expertise and facilities and a skilled delivery workforce, and indeed helping to bring along the next generation of researchers in as they're developing and as they're learning their clinical work, as well as at the same time, so that they understand research and indeed can engage with research and carry out research at a later date. We partner with lots of groups, in particular with patients and care service users and carers and communities more widely, and that's a particular strength, it's a particular focus of a lot of what we do. And we're obviously keen to get the best researchers, and we collaborate with lots of other organizations, including professional organizations such as this, but also third sector charities who can co-fund or do co-fund some of our research, and also provide access to patient and people groups, and indeed some particularly useful support in terms of scoping out calls and things that we do. And we work on with official development assistance globally as well. So it's as I said, we're quite a big organization. This was our budget in the 23-24 year, so 1.38 billion. It's not insignificant in that respect. Roughly half of that goes on in the red sector is all about infrastructure, which is largely not buildings and things, but it's mostly groups of people with specific expertise. I can't actually tell you how much money goes into nuclear medicine in this, but I suspect it's actually a relatively small amount, judging by the search that we did on what things we're funding specifically. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can engage and where the right places to go, and where we could encourage more applications for funding and indeed for running clinical studies in the NIHR. So if you're looking at thinking about running trials or developing the new technology, there's a few sort of questions that you typically want to ask as you go along, and these are the sorts of things that you're going to need to demonstrate in order to persuade the NHS or indeed any healthcare system, and NICE, if you want guidance around using the technology. The first thing is actually, can you actually get it to work? Have you got something which will work in humans, and doing that kind of moving out of the lab into that kind of first in human study? Second question is, okay, we've got something that looks like it works. Is it actually, does it have any efficacy? Does it actually do something useful? Does it provide benefit to the patients? And then the third question at the end of that, of course, is always is it worth doing? If it's so expensive, there will be questions about that. And cost effectiveness is going to be an important aspect. So how do we do that? So let's look at where the NIHR funds in this context. So what we don't fund is the more sort of fundamental research in developing the basic sort of science around some of the technologies that we're doing. So we need some sort of proof of concept. And if you're at all in engineering, technology readiness level of 3 is about the minimum level we would start. So that's basically where the research councils would typically stop funding. MRC goes a little bit further in some cases. So we're really interested in taking technologies out of from the lab bench into the clinic and then beyond, and building the evidence and right through the sort of clinical evaluation period to the point where you should hopefully have a high quality set of robust evidence that supports the value and the utility of your technology. And that's the kind of space we fund in. Again, at the other end of the scale, on the right-hand side of this chart, what we don't fund is the actual commissioning of the service into the NHS. That is an NHS responsibility, and the organisations that are set up to do that. I won't get into all the politics or the concerns about getting new technologies into the NHS. That would be an entirely different lecture. So just to make things more complicated, we are, as I said, we're a big organisation. We've actually got 11 different research programmes. Unfortunately, we've only got 10 bits of the jigsaw because the person who created the slide originally left and didn't leave us the template. So we're missing a jigsaw piece, which is the 11th programme is research programme for social care. So that's probably not entirely relevant tonight. But quite a number of these research programs will be. We're a public organisation, so acronyms abound, and there are a lot of them. I will try and explain and not just skate over all of those. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the programs that might be relevant in terms of this series of sort of working through the process from first in human right through to cost effectiveness studies. At the early end is the NIHR's I4I program, possibly also research for patient benefit as well. I4I stands for Invention for Innovation, and it's mostly and I'm going to talk a little bit about that program also as an exemplar of the sort of way that we typically manage our funding processes. And then we have program grants, we have an efficacy mechanism evaluation in that sort of looking at the efficacy, whether it's going to work. Also I4I sits in that space. And then at the far end, we've got health technology assessment, or HTA, which is the sort of gold standard, large multi-site trial that tries to demonstrate that the technology that you've got, or the intervention that you've developed, actually has value. It works in lots of different settings, in lots of different places, and performs pretty much the same across the board, and gives you evidence around the economics of the process. So let's talk a little bit about I4I. It's our translational research funding program for medtech innovations. It's the program that I know most because it's the team that I work in. So this is around developing medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, and digital and AI technologies. So in the diagnostic space, we will typically fund radiological technologies, in particular with AI associated with often in looking at some of those diagnostic technologies. we have funded a little bit, and we've certainly had some applications associated with various parts of radiotherapy treatment technologies within the program. But again, it's not a very common aspect. The program itself has 3 different streams of funding. I'm really only going to talk about one of those tonight, because I think the others are fairly limited amounts of money. That the sort of thing that we fund quite a lot of startup and new companies with smaller amounts of money at earlier stages of their development. But we will fund again from that basic research stage right through to implementation and understanding about implementation. And I think that's a message around the sort of things that we increasingly, not just NIHR, but the wider system is really interested in understanding the whole issues around implementation. And of course, in nuclear medicine implementation, there's some significant barriers and issues around how to implement some of these technologies, particularly if you're not just the infrastructure that's required, but sometimes when you change that, the technology that you're using, that has a significant impact and potentially a cost. So understanding what the implementation challenges are, where the barriers are, and what the opportunities are is really quite important. And the earlier that you can do that, the better. So building that into plans for doing even some of the earlier stage efficacy trials that are relevant, and even perhaps in those first in humans, starting to try and understand what that starts to look like, can be really advantageous. And certainly when it comes to making the case for your technology being procured or being part of the by the healthcare system and being used, that information early can be really helpful and can help direct a lot of what you do. So I'll just talk a little bit about the application process, and this is a common process for pretty much, I think, almost all of our funding opportunities, certainly the ones that will be relevant to this audience. We operate on a 2-stage process. So we have an outline submission, which is outlined, but it's not necessarily as short as you might like it to be. But it really does relatively high level, but you really need to make the case for why you're doing what you're doing. Most of our calls are researcher led. In other words, they're or in other terms, response mode. So you tell us what the unmet need is and what your solution to that is, and why it's worth doing and what you're going to do about it. That application at that stage will be looked at by a series of experts from our committees, and they will give some scores to that, and they'll go through a shortlisting process. It's possible that in some of the programs there are some triaging. Well, there's usually a bit of a triage at the beginning to make sure that the application is actually relevant and fits the remit of the program. At the shortlisting phase, there's a subset of the panel or committee will actually look at the scores, have a conversation about and decide whether it needs to be shortlisted to ask you to fill in a full application for the second stage. If you're unsuccessful, you will get feedback. You can come back round again and reapply, obviously subject to the fact that you've addressed the feedback. You'll still get feedback if you get invited to stage 2. Stage 2 is generally somewhat longer and expected in more detail, particularly around the methodologies. So if when you're running a clinical study, we want to know about the statistics. We want to know about the value. Why are you choosing to use the methodology that you're using? Why are the numbers? Why have you chosen that set of numbers? Something about your recruitment opportunity and realistic. One of the things that's fair to say, and this isn't anything to do specifically with nuclear medicine trials, but trials of any sort, there's always a challenge on recruitment. In fact, at the moment, it generally is quite difficult to recruit patients, or can be quite difficult to recruit patients, not least because the service is under such pressure that it's not always possible to get the numbers. People don't have the time to recruit patients fast enough. So being realistic about that's quite important. So when you submit a full application, you'll also then that will also go out to peer review. So these will be people who are technical and clinical experts in the specific area of your application. And you get an opportunity to rebut those peer reviews. And then the second stage, in the I4I's case, you'll be invited to in person. In fact, it's virtual, but if for you, but the committee meets in person to actually make a presentation and have a Q&A session. Most of the other programs don't do that. Most of the other programs, this is still a paper exercise using all the information that's been gathered around the peer review, your rebuttal, and the application. And then that will be reviewed and discussed by the committee, and there'll be scoring, and then there'll be you'll be scored as fundable or potentially fundable or not fundable, and you'll get feedback accordingly. And then subject to the available budget from the program, you'll get awarded funding once the department have ratified that decision. The length of time it takes to do that can be significantly variable depending on the program. If you're doing a very large study like an HTA study, it sometimes takes up between 9 to 12 months, probably, or some occasionally longer to get through that process. So I'll talk about one or two of the other programs just briefly. So these slides will be available afterwards, so people can have copies of the slides if they want. I've given BNMS a PDF copy which is perfectly able to share, so you could look at the more detail here. Research for patient benefit is looking at, in particular, what it says on the tin. Is there a benefit to the patient? So quite often this is a sort of feasibility study. It's feasibility in, does it actually provide benefit, but it's also feasibility in, here's my protocol on a small scale. They only fund up to about 500K maximum, and there's three tiers. That's the top tier of level of funding. So it's going to be a reasonably small trial, certainly in this space, I think. But what you can do is set up the protocol, which you can test out and show that it could be used for a much larger study later. And there's unlike I4I, which we have a 36-month maximum, that this RFPB doesn't have a specific requirement for only to be 3 years. The EMI program has no official banding in terms of the amount of money that's available. You, like I4I, as it happens, you and most of the other programs, you tell us what money you need to do and what you're going to do with it, and there's a justification around value for money. So EMI is potentially one of the programs that would be very useful for people to carrying out a molecular radiotherapy type trial, I think, because two things happen. One is it's a co-funded program with MRC, and the reason it's co-funded with MRC is because the M for is about mechanism. So there's an expectation, as well as doing the trial to look for the efficacy of the intervention and the technology, whether that's some imaging diagnostic or whether it's a therapeutic or a combination indeed. They're also looking to try and unpick some of what's going on in terms of mechanism of action, or what's actually happening, and some more sort of fundamental studies alongside the trial is expected as a rule, and that allows you to do some unpicking of what's actually happening if that isn't entirely clear. HTA program, and again, this is as I've mentioned already, this is really the typical large pragmatic study looking at cost effectiveness and clinical and cost effectiveness across in an NHS organization, usually compared to standard of care. Sometimes quite a lot of the HTA studies are actually specified by NICE. So NICE who are looking for evidence to support the guidance and evaluation of different interventions, will specifically have calls out for this. But they also have a researcher-led or response mode level of funding. Usually for most of the programs, you need to be a clinician or a clinical academic to apply. I4I does allow small companies to apply for funding. Obviously, you can have collaborators who are industry as well as clinical or other academic partners in all of these. Again, no maximum duration and no maximum cost. Again, you just have to justify what it is you're doing, that it makes sense. If you have an intervention, so this is probably not quite so relevant, in this particular audience. But if you have an intervention that's looking about changing the way a service is delivered in some way that makes it potentially more efficient, has better outcomes for patients, and probably more cost effective for the system. We have a program called Health and Social Care Delivery Research, which looks at generating evidence of the improvement that happens on the back of actually changing the way the service can be delivered. So there may be things in the way that in the nuclear medicine space where this would be relevant. It's worth having a look. You'll see that there's all of the programs have their own contact details. In fact, I've put the email addresses on the slide. Actually, if you look at our website and look under the programs, they have also generally have a phone number, so you can actually phone up and talk to someone about what you're doing and whether it's relevant and a fit for the specific program. So writing grant applications is not necessarily the easiest thing, and the expectation for some of ours are quite high. We do fund on quality of the application, so we're looking for really high quality applications. You can get quite a bit of support. So just the usual story. If you're applying for funding from us, it's worth reading the guidance because there's a lot of really useful information in there and some signposting and clearly expectations. So don't miss out on reading the guidance. It's surprising how many people fail to read the guidance and then miss something out that's quite important. Almost all the programs now will have a pre-launch webinar of some description, which will talk about the program and the particular call, and anything that if there are specific commission calls where we're looking for something very specific, those things can be, and we'll also often have case studies of people that have been funded. So actually, if anyone is aware of particular funding or funded projects in this particular space, or would like to has done one and would like to volunteer, I'm sure there'd be an opportunity for one of the programs to use you as a case study as part of one of the launch webinars. And then the other piece that's probably most useful, particularly if you are not familiar with the NIHR, and that's the NIHR Research Support Service, which is a freely available service. There are 8 hubs around. You can Google most of this stuff quite easily and get directly to the page. None of the 8 hubs have any particular specialism in radiotherapy technology, certainly not molecular radiotherapy, that I was able to discover specifically. But what they are extremely good at is patient and public involvement, and they can help you with that process if you engage soon enough before the application. Don't leave it till 2 weeks before the deadline of the application. But if you give them some time, they can help you run some patient and public engagement activities if you haven't already done that to support your application. Secondly, they're extremely good around methodology for clinical trials, so they can help you with the methodology that you may need to use, and challenge you perhaps to think about different ways of doing what you're doing and making sure that the methodology you have is A, robust, but also B, is appropriate to what it is you're trying to show as your outcomes. And they can also, because they are funded at sort of at arm's length, they can actually read your application. They won't write it for you, but they can read it and they can make suggestions and comments to you in response to what you've put that could help you couch things in the right way, make sure you include all the right things that need to be included. So that is available. If you're not an academic, so anyone can just go and connect and contact the Research Support Service. If you're a company and you want to access any of the expertise that we've got, particularly around potentially supporting applications or partners that you're looking for, we have an expertise partnering service, and I'll come on to a little bit more detail of that in a minute. And there are people out there who can also support your grant writing. There are not that many people that are currently that are familiar with NIHR grant writing as grant writers. It's fair to say, but there are some. I need to say that there are other funders available. Obviously UKRI, and I think in this space, in the more fundamental side of things, EPSRC, healthcare technologies potentially, or EPSRC generally, may be able to help with some of the earlier, more fundamental research. MRC, when you get to the translational space, the MRC DPFS scheme is potentially of use could be of use in this space, and that gets you into that sort of early translational space potentially as well and potentially with some development work that might be necessary. Innovate UK, if you're a company, for small companies, would be the place to go. And in particular, probably the biomedical catalyst in principle, or if they have a very specific call around radiotherapy or molecular radiotherapy. SPRI healthcare probably isn't going to be relevant to this. Worth keeping an eye out for Horizon. Now that we're back in Horizon, it's probably worth keeping a lookout for what might be happening in the Horizon space. I can't honestly tell you that I've had a chance to look for any specific details, but there have been, when I was at GE, we were involved in at least one consortium in the pre days before we left the European Union the first time, but there are definitely some programs that might be of interest, and it might be worth keeping an eye out for that. So let's talk about other support for studies and trials briefly. That 1.38 billion, as I said, goes quite a long way, and we fund something in the excess of 25,000 people across the country. This is a map of our infrastructure. It's mainly in England, so we operate on a devolved. Health is a devolved a facility for across the UK. So most of our infrastructure is in England, almost all of it. We do fund most of our programs now fund the whole of the UK. So you can be from anywhere in the UK. You can certainly have collaborators and partners and contractors if that's appropriate from other parts of the UK. And indeed, if you can justify why you need somebody because they've got specific expertise or technology, there's absolutely no reason why you can't collaborate with or work with someone from outside of the UK. Lots of acronyms on there. I won't need to go into all the details, but there are a number of things particularly that might be relevant. If you are a industry player, in particular, we can support you across all of those stages of development. That's true for whoever you are. But for industry in particular, we have a number of services from our industry team that can give you access to patients, data samples, obviously funding we've been talking about, research delivery I'm going to come on to in a moment, and in particular the expertise part. If you need people who to talk to consult with, perhaps key opinion leaders, if you need people who might be a PI for a site that's recruiting for one of your for a trial at some point, then that's appropriate. If you need specific facilities in certain areas, then also that may be appropriate. But my experience of working in the nuclear medicine space is that most people know where those are and what those are. But there are going to be quite a few people associated with NIHR, and we can broker those introductions through our expertise partnering service. So our industry team, we have a 2-week turnaround cycle. You just contact industry@nihr.ac.uk, and they will have a quick conversation with you, find out what you are looking for. They'll ask you to fill a form in to tell you what you're looking for, and they'll go out intelligently across our database of people with the specific expertise that you're looking for, and make those introductions for you. And as I say, that's a 2-week turnaround cycle, so it's actually quite helpful. You'll notice I'm mostly talking about SMEs. This service is also available to larger companies. In the terms of funding, typically we don't fund large organizations as large companies as lead organizations, but large companies are welcome to be part of a collaborative bid, and depending on what you're actually doing to support that, can also receive some of the funding. Now, this is probably the bit that, in particular, around running clinical trials that the NIHR has to bring. So, the Research Delivery Network, what used to be called the Clinical Research Network, is a set of regional. It's a regional network. So there are 13 different regions now. Used to be 15. It's now down to 13. Some reorganization, and they can help you. They understand all the local, embedded in all the local hospitals across the different regions. They have people who understand what's going on in those spaces, specialty leads in all sorts of different disease areas. So there will be some people who know, and there are specialty leads in radio therapeutic and diagnostics as well in this space. And in fact, Jonathan Wadsley, who was the person who persuaded or asked me nicely to come and give this talk as part of the series, after I'd given a talk to hit one of his specialty teams, has a group of specialists across the RDN. So there'll be one in each of the regions across the country who's specific, at least one specifically who can help. And what they can help you with is that planning for your clinical trial, all the things you need to do, access to expertise, looking at the feasibility of your study. So if you're trying to do a particular type of study, are there limitations as to the number of places that you could do this? Could you do it in a district general hospital or not? They can tell you all of those kind of bits of information. They also work with NHS on digitrials, or again, that's probably not going to be relevant in this particular space. They can talk about places, they can identify the specific locations where it's possible to do your trial, and they understand have intelligence. They'll know about not just about whether it would be possible, but they'll also know something about the loading on that site and the opportunities for recruiting patients and whether there's capacity to do what you're trying to do. And there's and they can help you with all the contracting. And as you're probably aware, there's a national costing template that's been set up so that all the hospitals across the system will use the same standard costing templates associated with this. So all of that is available, and they can help you with all of that. And they can, once the trial is up and running, they can monitor and help with recruitment activity and make sure that their sites are recruiting to time. And actually, there's an significant increase recently in the performance of clinical trials, a number of clinical trials that are recruiting to target and to time. So the other part of this is that they maintain for us the NIHR's clinical research portfolio. And if you can talk, you'll need to talk to them anyway in terms of applying for funding, or indeed if you're going to run a trial, you should be talking. It's well worth talking to them, because they can, if you're eligible to be listed on the portfolio, that brings you access to some research nurses and some other capability and facilities, which could significantly reduce your cost or make things a bit easier for you to do. So again, worth looking at the research delivery network. And again, there's more details on the website, and they can. It's again industry. If you're an industry player and you want access to this, the industry@nihr.ac.uk email address will get you into the research delivery network, as well as the industry partnering service. And the other piece. So this is my effectively my final penultimate slide. NHS Innovation Service is a service that's looking for trying to get people innovators and people who are developing new technologies to record what they're doing and the stage at which they're at in terms of the innovation development. That will be then triaged to potentially, if you're not ready you don't need to be way down the track and ready for NICE to do your evaluation or assessment, or think about putting you into a guidance of some sort. You can be really at the beginning of that journey, and the opportunity then is to continue to add more data and to be able to tick more of the boxes of the stuff that you need to be able to do. I'd encourage you to look at if you're developing something significantly new, it's worth looking at the question list that you have to do, because it will help you understand some of the evidence journey that you're going to need to go on, and some of the questions you're going to need to answer if you're coming to try and sell your technology into the NHS. And those organisations listed on the slide, which includes NIHR, are part of the signposting service in there. So you can choose which ones of those or all of them you want to potentially to be signposted or to be working with. And if you're not ready for NICE to say yes, this is ready to do something with, you'll be signposted by some of the other players there. So it's well worth getting connected, and it potentially gives your innovation some visibility. So I keep referring to the website. NIHR.ac.uk is the website. It's well worth looking at. You can look at all the programs. You can look for all those bits of information that I've given you. And most of the programs, depending on the program name, have a program name at nihr.ac.uk email, and there will be a phone number for those as well. So I think we're now open for questions. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Ian. That was really great. That was a really interesting subject that I learned a lot. Things certainly I wasn't aware of. I've got a couple of questions in the chat. I've written a few silly questions, daft questions probably of my own. And so I'm going to go in with the chat ones. Well, they're not chat ones, they're in the Q&As button. No one's doing the chat one, otherwise that would be bad. So I've got one from Susanna Kallianen. She says, is it possible to have international partners when applying for funding, either academic or industry?
The answer is yes. The normal case is that you would need to justify why you do. Clearly, this is UK taxpayers' money that we're talking about. The normal expectation is that you're likely to be working somewhere in the UK. However, particularly in a field like such as this, there are going to be experts in other places and companies maybe, or subcontractors, people like that, that you may want to work with just because they are who they are and they're the right people to be working with. So we can do that. You can just justify that, and that's perfectly fine.
Great, thank you. So I've got one now from Arash Latifultajar. Says, thanks for a great talk, which is always nice to hear. Is RDN assistance free of charge, or does it require costing for the funding applications?
It is free of charge. So there are some differences between an industrial or a commercial trial and an academic trial. So if you're an academic or you're in the NHS and you're running a study, then there's appropriate cost associated with that, which is a non-commercial trial, and there's all sorts of templates and things for various forms and contracts that you'll need to fill in. But if you're a company and you're sponsoring the trial specifically and you're paying for it, that will cost you more because commercial trials are slightly more expensive. But that's where the national costing process comes in. So it's very clear. You can see up front how that works. But the help that the RDN can give you effectively will be free from that point of view in terms of helping you. And if you're applying, if you're a company and you're applying for and you're on an NIHR grant, so if you're on say you've got an HTA award of some sort and that this is part of your trial, that you are treated as non-commercial because there's no point in the government paying commercial rates for something it's already giving a grant money to. So we will treat small companies that have trials that are funded through an award from us. Indeed, that's probably true for other funding. If you had Innovate UK funding, that would also be true. Is that they are treated as non-commercial.
Okay, thank you. I've got one from Jane Zozabowski. Thank you, Ian. Very interesting. Could you say something about the BRCs? Are these funded wholly by NIHR, and how do we access that funding?
Right. So yeah, biomedical research centres are the sort of experimental medicine, that very early stage of translation. We've got 20 of them around the country. They are funded by the wholly funded by the NIHR. Usually, that's not to say they're not bringing in other funding and other things associated with that, but we fund them entirely. They're what they ask for. The way that technically you probably can't access that funding as someone from outside in that kind of context, but that's where partnering, so they have their own themes and they have their own pieces of work going on. What you can do though is access the people in those relevant BRCs that have expertise in particular areas. So if you were doing something in cancer area, quite a large number of our BRCs are, not surprisingly, working in cancer. Probably most of them actually have got some kind of activity in cancer in one form or another. You could access those people, that expertise, as part of that, and potentially collaborate with them and access it sort of not funding specifically, because the funding is given to the institutions that are. But you might well benefit from some of the funding that they've put towards some projects that they're working with. So.
Okay, we've got one from Glenn Flux. I love Glenn's questions. He always gets down to the nitty-gritty. So he said, thanks, Ian. Is it possible to give an idea of the success rate for applications? And that is a question I'm sure we're all very interested in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everyone wants to know. So actually, what I can tell you is for I4I Product Development Awards, success rates around about 20, it's about 12%, something 12, 13%, that sort of order at the moment. And the way that works, stage one is down to about 20, just 20 to 25%. I can't remember the exact figure at the moment. It's dropping actually at stage one. Stage two, certainly in I4I, we still maintain a success rate of 50% because we only have a certain number of slots because we're doing interviews. So we only have a certain number of slots, and we typically fund about approximately half or slightly more than half of the people that get shortlisted. The other programs, actually, if you go on the website and look in the programs, all the programs should have got published success rates. So it'll be an average. What I can tell you is that in common with everybody that's giving grant money around, particularly we are starting to see significant increases in the number of applications. In I4I case, that's particularly because we fund small companies and there isn't any investment out there at the moment for early stage, in fact, even for mid-stage developments. So people are coming to grant funders for funding, and that's happening across the piece. We are starting to see the beginning of more academic applications, and I think not surprisingly, given the financial situation of lots of our universities, so we're starting to see more applications coming from universities as well now. At least for the moment. I think we'll see how that pans out, because I think if they start to lose too many people, then we may find we have less applications. But for the moment, the numbers are going up, so success rates are coming down. What I would say is that they're generally a lot better than most of our success rates are significantly better than Innovate UK applications. Innovate UK. If you ever apply to Innovate UK, if you're a company, whatever you do, they've stopped doing smart awards for the moment because the success rates dropped to almost invisible at the last call. So you need to, but it's worth looking at. Most of them are published, and ours are as well. I think you'll find out all our programs are published. Good question.
Thank you. I've got a few questions as well. I was just thinking, if somebody's sort of sitting listening to this webinar that's interested in generally, maybe not necessarily at the point of like writing grant applications, but just generally is interested in research, has tuned into this webinar for that reason, what advice would you give to them if someone who hasn't maybe got a lot of research experience on how to get involved? And that's a question for Mark and Stefan as well.
Yeah, well,
that's
one of you two guys want to have a go at that first, and I could tell you a little bit.
Give you a rest, Ian.
Stefan, do you want to go first?
Please, Mark.
Well, it's a very interesting question, Julie, isn't it? I guess if we are talking about clinicians who are working perhaps as trainees, either in nuclear medicine or oncology, who have ideas, or maybe physicists working in nuclear medicine departments that have ideas, there will be MDTs, there will be more senior colleagues around that they can talk to and bounce ideas off. They may have a very technical concept of research they want to do, or it may be more specifically disease focused. And then, sadly, we lost the NCRI, but most of the previous NCRI groups that are disease specific have been reincarnated in another form. And most of them would welcome more junior members to come along and to take part in that. So I think really, if somebody wants to get involved in research, and if somebody has got ideas, then they should really talk to the people around them and go out and engage with different organizations and societies related to what it is they want to deal with.
Thanks, Mark. Stefan, you got any
Yes,
further comments?
Thank you. I fully agree with Mark. So if you have research questions, please reach out to the academic colleagues or other colleagues from other trusts. What I want to ask now, Ian, is practically we have a lot of research questions and we want to apply for grants, but at the end, as you have mentioned, it's going back down to there are some priorities, so research priorities. Now, how can we find out about those research priorities ahead of applying and preparing a grant, which is time consuming? So how to find out evidence uncertainties and whether the research question my colleague has, or myself or Mark, in instance, is relevant and is appealing to NIHR to be funded further.
Yeah, and that's a very good question. And I have to say, I'll be perfectly honest, hold my hand up. We're not always very good with some of our commission calls around very specific needs at getting those that information out soon enough to give people an opportunity to really respond to it. Quite often we end up it ends partly because of the signing off processes for these kind of things. Sometimes these things end up being a bit late in the day, and so you don't have a lot of time. So you tend to get what is already there, what people are already ready to go with. You tend to miss out. You can miss out on some of the slightly more what might emerge if people knew about it and had a chance to think about it. So, but there's a number of things that are going on. So clearly, national priorities, policy, the government have got some particular areas of focus. The NIHR itself will put things out there, but there will be some specific calls on certain things. The 10-year plan, when it eventually comes out, I don't think we're going to get, I suspect we won't get any significant surprises there. Certainly in terms of disease areas, they're probably like to be mostly the same ones they've been for the last 10 years. In terms of cancer, the whole early detection process aspect is really important, and there's quite a long journey to go to get to the target. I think it's fair to say that they're not going to get to the 75% at stage 1 and 2 that they've targeted for the long-term plan. So that direction of travel will continue. Even if it got to 75%, they want to continue and to go on and further. So being aware of what's going on in what the policy, what's going on, Office for Life Science, particularly if you're in industry, again, they've got their own, what they're now calling health goals, because they're not allowed to call them missions anymore because the government have their own missions for interest. Alongside that, in NIHR, we manage the James Lind Alliance as part of what we do. So that's one of the effectively a process for trying to identify unmet need, and so that's done in conjunction with patients and public as well as clinicians, and so that some of that is worth having a look at. If you look up the James Lind Alliance, you'll have a list of areas that they worked in. It tells you when that report was done. They're not research questions per se. They are, I think you'd need to take the priorities that they've identified and generate some research questions to help answer them, but they highlight areas of significant unmet need. NICE obviously also and in fact all of our programs now have a rolling call. If you have something from the James Lind Alliance that you've identified, you can reference that as part of your application and ticks the box. It means we know that you're connected to that. So typically, subject to obviously it being a good quality application, it does help. It potentially helps the committee make a good decision around that. Similarly for NICE, when NICE are looking for evidence generation for some of the technologies that they're looking for, that we have a rolling call associated with those as well. So they'll put a scope out for those kind of calls. So most of our programs, most of that's in HTA to be fair, but it rolls across some of the other programs as well. So there are some things that you can do to help that.
I think we've only got time for one one quick question. It was what I wanted to just squeeze it in because it is another one for the panel. Jane Sozabowski's asked about what experience do the panel members have in to share of applying for NIHR funding. Has it been a positive experience? Have you done it? How have you found it?
Yes, so I have done it. It was a painful experience in the way that it's a lengthy process, but indeed you have to get into it and argue and put together all the preliminary data and then statistics and everything together. So that's it was not successful. But the same grant which we submitted for NIHR was successful for a charity and other grant application. So we got it, not from NIHR, unfortunately, but we are keep trying. We will keep going there.
Thanks, Stefan.
So,
Mark, have you got anything to add quickly? I'm going to close in a couple of minutes.
I've got no real experience of applying for NIHR funding. Most of the clinical trials that I've been involved with have been charitably funded, either by a big charity like Cancer Research UK or by smaller disease-specific children's cancer charities like Solving Kids Cancer or Neuroblastoma UK. But one question for Ian really is, I mean, Stefan is very interested in prostate cancer, which is important. And as I'm a man and I'm getting older, I'm more concerned that treatments for prostate cancer should be improved. But anything that Stefan researches in the field of prostate cancer is likely to benefit many thousands of men. Anything that I do that is valuable will benefit a relatively small handful of patients in comparison. Does NIHR look at the frequency of a disease and think that prostate cancer is more worth investing in because it would benefit more people in the long run?
It's a good. That is an exceptionally good question. I think the answer is not necessarily. I think we are conscious that we are a public funder, and some of the things that you're talking about, where there's small populations, whether it's rare diseases and so on, if we don't fund it, it won't get funded. So there are certain things where if the case is, the case is made quite clearly, then we will fund those, just because, I mean, obviously subject to the quality of the application, that we will fund that, because probably no one else is going to fund it except for the charity. So it's worth saying that in this context, we are very happy to have charity co-funding alongside an NIHR application. So you can come with some charity funding, or maybe you've had some already, and they'll say, well, we're prepared to fund you the second stage or a proportion if you get work with NIHR. We have mechanisms for that to happen, and we do quite a lot of that funding, again, not in this space. So what I would say, just very briefly, I know Julie wants to kind of wrap things up here, but we do not do. We had a quick search. I had a quick search done around the sort of molecular radiotherapy trials and projects that we funded. We haven't funded very much in this space. So it's just a plea really to actually let's have some more applications in this space. We need to see more of those. It might challenge the system a little bit around this, but we definitely need to see it's a gap in our portfolio.
And I think that's a really good note to end on. Thank you, Ian. Perfectly timed, actually. So I'd like to close by obviously thanking our speaker, Dr. Ian Newington, and our panel members, Stefan Vu and Mark Gaze, for joining us. It's been a really interesting, informative hour to warm up our chilly February Tuesday evening. So our next webinar will take place on the 11th of March, and it's entitled Working Strategically Across Research Councils to Ensure Collaboration at a National Level. And that'll be delivered by Dr. Juliana Maynard, who some of you will remember from the panel last month. So registration for this is as usual via the BNMS website. And finally, thank you everybody for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.